So we've now activated the yeast, and I'm going to describe the ingredients that we'll mix together. So we have our ingredients laid out here that we're going to mix into the dough. If possible, everything should be at room temperature. Sugar, butter, salt, lemon juice, vanilla extract, milk, eggs, the activated yeast mixture, and flour divided into 2 portions. And the reason for that will become clear when we start adding ingredients. All right, so we're going to begin by creaming together our butter and sugar. We'll let that mix together nicely for a minute or so. Now that the butter and sugar have integrated, we're going to add the rest of the ingredients except for the flour. So, salt, lemon juice, vanilla extract, eggs, milk. Just gonna let that combine for 15 seconds or so. And then we'll add activated yeast mixture. All right, so we'll let that mix up just for another minute or so. All right, so it's time to add flour, and we have, again, the flour divided into 2 portions, and the reason for that is because it's nice to start with the paddle attachment to integrate the liquid ingredients, but that's not so great for kneading dough. And about halfway through the flour, this will start getting hung up, so we switch over to the dough hook. So I'm gonna begin adding this incrementally, add maybe half to start. And by the time the half of the flour is added, it'll be a thick batter and start being a little bit too thick for this paddle attachment. All right, so we're at a point where it's time to add the remainder of the flour, and I've switched over the dough hook. So we'll add maybe a third of the second portion of flour.
So it looks like you have that on very low speed, like 1 or 2.
Right. Yeah, if you try to go too high there, it's just going to make a big mess. The end state that we're looking for here is that the dough will be cohesive and it will not stick to your bowl. And then once it reaches that state, I like to continue kneading for about 10 minutes to develop the glutens in the dough. I'm going to further integrate this flour, and we'll check back when this has reached a kind of level of consistency that I like All right, I've stopped the mixer because I think we're at a good level of consistency. What you want to look for is the dough is generally not sticky. It probably has like a Play-Doh texture, and when you run the mixer, it's not sticking to the bowl. So this to me indicates that the dough is it's got correct amount of flour. If it was more sticky than this, perhaps if your flour measurements were off a little bit, I would probably add a little bit more flour until it's not sticking to anything. But this is good. So now I'm gonna run the mixer for about 10 minutes to work the dough. Finished kneading the dough. And now it's time to begin the bulk fermentation. So, I mean, all you're doing here is punching this down a little bit and then covering it up, some plastic wrap, and then let it sit for about 2 hours. I think we like to see it triple in size, double or triple. Anyway, it'll be a lot bigger, so we'll check back when that is finished up. All right, so the bulk fermentation is completed at this point. As you can see, it's risen significantly, multiple times the original volume. This has been rising for a little over 2 hours, and we're at the point where we're going to shape the loaves. So I'm just going to show off some equipment that it's handy to have around during this part. First of all, I like to work the dough on just on a counter. I think it works nicely, and it's helpful to have a spatula around just to free the dough from the bowl. Also, a bench scraper. I find this really useful for cutting up the bits of dough before you braid. I have been experimenting with an interesting technique for shaping the individual ropes, which makes use of a rolling pin, and then having ready a cookie sheet, which is going to be large enough for the final loaf, lined with some parchment paper. So having all these things ready to go right away is handy, I find. All right, so we're ready to take our dough out. Put it onto the work surface. Set aside this piece of plastic wrap. We'll use that again. And actually, I'm going to cut another piece of plastic wrap, which is a little bit longer. This will go over the entire loaf when we're done shaping it while it proofs. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, just kind of scrape down the sides of the dough in the mixing bowl, and then punch it down a little bit. Finally turn it out. So the way that I braid Vanochka is not the traditional Czech way. It's a way that is, I guess my family has done for a long time, which is 2-3 rope braids stacked on top of each other. So what we're going to do is take the mass of dough and kind of work it into an elongated shape, which is easy to eyeball and cut in half. And then we're going to cut each of these halves into thirds, and each of those thirds will get rolled out eventually into a rope. So I used to weigh all this stuff up, and now I kind of just eyeball because I found that it's good enough. So take one of the portions and just stick those thirds under plastic wrap. The idea here is just to prevent your dough from drying out. And then work the other half into another shape that you can estimate thirds out of. All right, we're gonna do this one at a time. This one ended up a little small, so I'm just gonna stick a little extra onto it. So again, you can just stick those excess parts under some plastic wrap. Okay, so now we're gonna work each piece into a rope, and the way that I like to do that is a technique that I found when making hot dog buns, which is that instead of rolling this out into a rope directly, you work it out into an elongated piece and then roll it out flat. And then from there, we're gonna actually roll it up kind of like a cinnamon roll. And that's what gets shaped into the rope. Interestingly, this is the first time I've ever made this recipe with bread flour, and consistency of the dough is a lot more elastic than normal. So anyway, this doesn't have to be perfect, but generally you're rolling something out that's approximately the length of the pan, because that's the length of the final loaf. Approximation is fine. And then you're gonna pull up one edge here and start rolling this. And then you're gonna take the seam and pinch it down all the way the length of the rope on both sides. It's okay to get nice and aggressive here because you don't want this to open up in the oven. And then roll it out a little bit. Now, my theory for why this is a useful technique is that the rolling out of the dough helps work out air, which can cause the dough to kind of rip and explode in the oven, which never looks very pretty. So again, just make sure you work the seam closed. And then this is gonna get set aside. We'll just set it under here with the rest of our pieces and pull the next one out. And so I'm gonna roll out 2 more pieces, and then we'll go into braiding. All right, so now we're gonna braid. This braid is for the bottom. Not really super good at this, so it always is a little bit of a relearning experience for me, but you're gonna literally braid it as though you're braiding somebody's hair. So I like to start in the middle and then swap the braid around once you finish one end. So just braid it like you're braiding hair. I don't really know how to explain it other than that. Crimp down the edges, tuck them underneath. Oh, and sometimes it helps just to eyeball what you're doing to make sure that you're not making any mistakes. But I think that looks right. Yeah, we'll just say that's right. This one's for the bottom, which means it's getting covered up by the second braid. So if this one's not perfect, I think that's okay. This actually looks kind of wrong to me. There we go. Then what you're gonna do with that is lay it out onto parchment. And from there, we're gonna take the longer piece of plastic wrap and set that over this while we work out our next braid. I'm not gonna show that because I already demoed braiding. So we'll check back when I'm done with the second braid and construct the rest of the loaf. All right, so I made the next braid and I went ahead and I put it on the first braid that I showed you last. And just some helpful tips here. If you can, make the top braid a little bit longer than the bottom, because what is helpful to do is you kind of stretch it and then tuck the ends under the lower braid. And once you've done that, cover the whole thing up with plastic wrap, and then just start a timer counting up because we want to keep track of how long this is proofed for. Now, as this proofs, what we're checking for is the consistency of the dough, specifically the springiness. And right now, if I poke it, it'll pretty much spring back out completely. And a properly proofed Vanochka will spring back about halfway. So normally I found this takes about 45 minutes to an hour to fully proof to be ready to go. Now, if you don't proof it, if you were to put it directly in the oven, what's gonna happen is this is gonna aggressively spring in the oven and it's gonna rip the individual ropes and it's gonna look bad. So we let it rise on the counter 45 minutes to an hour before putting it in the oven. So I will come back once it is properly proofed. I'll show you how that looks, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I think it's about fully proofed. Again, just giving it a poke and looking for the spring back about halfway. That seems pretty reasonable to me. This is a proof of about an hour, which will, your results will vary based on the temperature of your room and probably the dough. Okay, so I'm gonna take off plastic wrap, and the final step before it goes into the oven is to give it a wash. I understand there's some kind of debate between whether a egg or butter wash is better. I actually use half and half because I find it works well and it's just easier. So get a brush, try to cover all the outside surfaces as best you can. Doesn't have to be perfect. And this will shine the outside of the loaf and it'll make it look nice. Well, before this point, you'll have wanted to preheat your oven. The recipe that I work from calls for 375, but I actually find that a little bit lower, like around 350, tends to create maybe a little bit nicer, lighter crust. So that's what I'm doing today. So that looks pretty good to me. So now it's gonna go into the oven. I'll check back when we pull it out. And yeah. Okay, so it's out of the oven. Again, it was 350 degrees for 45 minutes. I'm pretty happy with how this came out. And just a a note. It's helpful if your oven isn't super even to turn it every 15 minutes, so that's 3 turns. And that's what I did. And I think it cooked pretty evenly. Came to a good color, nice and dark, but not too dark. And so, yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy.